My name is Caleb Reyes. I'm 29 years old, and I would like it on the record that the worst decision of my professional life was made with a glass of Prosecco in one hand and absolutely no adult supervision. I'm an architect. Not the kind you see on TV shows sketching skyscrapers on napkins in slow motion while moody piano music plays. The actual kind, the kind who argues with contractors about drywall tolerances, forgets to eat lunch, and will absolutely reschedule a client call if it conflicts with a nap. I run a small firm in Chicago called Reyes & Voss with my business partner, and for most of my life my biggest professional nightmare was a client who wanted a rustic industrial Zen kitchen. Then Callaway Developments happened to me, and suddenly that client looked like a vacation. If you've ever wondered what it's like to accidentally kiss the man who made your early 20s miserable, in front of 200 people at his own family's anniversary gala, well, buckle up, because that's exactly where this story starts. But trust me, it gets so much stranger from there. And hey, if you're new here, welcome. Stick around because this one has a lot of turns coming, and I promise the payoff is worth it. Follow along if you want to see how badly one accidental kiss can rearrange a person's entire life. I certainly didn't see any of it coming, and I had a front row seat. Before we get to the kiss, yes, capital T, capital K, the one that ended up trending on the small gossipy corner of the internet where Chicago's business scene lives, you need to understand who Nathaniel Callaway is. Nate isn't just any guy. He's the golden heir of Callaway Developments, one of the biggest real estate firms in the Midwest, the kind of company that puts its name on glass towers along the river and gets thanked in mayoral speeches. He's an alpha, tall and broad through the shoulders in that way expensive tailoring can't fully disguise, with the sort of jaw that looks like it was cut specifically to appear in annual reports. Investors adore him. His father's board worships him. People genuinely straighten their posture when he walks into a room, like he's royalty who forgot to mention it. 6 years ago, when I was a nervous, underpaid summer intern at Sterling and Whitmore Architecture, and he was the firm's Rising Star project lead on loan from his father's company, I somehow became his favorite target. I never asked for his attention. All I did was point out, politely, in a room full of senior partners, that his structural load calculations for a proposed atrium were off by a decimal. I was 23. He was 25. I was right. He knew I was right. And from that day forward, Nathaniel Callaway treated correcting him like I'd personally insulted every Callaway who ever lived, going back to the Mayflower. I'm not a dramatic person by nature. I don't exaggerate. But Nate turned humiliating me into something like a competitive sport that summer, redlining my drawings in front of the whole studio, accidentally forgetting to loop me into meetings I was supposed to run. That specific smile he'd give me, sharp, pleasant, utterly lethal, right before he said something that would make my ears burn for the rest of the day. I hated him. Or at least, I was extremely sure that I did. There was a specific incident, near the end of that internship, that I never told anyone the full version of, not even Jordan, who has heard every embarrassing story from my entire adult life, usually more than once. Sterling and Whitmore had a tradition of end-of-summer critiques, where every intern presented one project to the full studio, senior partners included. I'd worked on mine for 3 straight weeks, barely sleeping, convinced it was the best thing I'd ever designed. Nate tore it apart in under 4 minutes, efficiently, publicly, without raising his voice once, which somehow made it worse, because there was nothing to push back against, just a series of calm, devastating observations that left me standing at the front of that room, with my ears burning and absolutely nothing to say. I didn't cry, mostly out of sheer stubbornness, but I came close enough that I spent the next 20 minutes hiding in a supply closet pretending to look for toner. What I didn't know until 6 years later, standing in his penthouse office while he confessed it to me across a stack of blueprints, was that he'd rewritten his own notes on my project 4 times that week, trying to find a version of the critique that didn't sound like what it actually was, which was a 25-year-old golden boy panicking about a 23-year-old intern who'd made him feel, for the first time in his adult life, genuinely unsteady. He never told me any of that back then. Back then, all I got was the polished, brutal version, delivered with a smile I mistook for cruelty for 6 entire years. The night everything went sideways was the Callaway Developments' 20th anniversary gala, held at the top of one of the company's existing office towers. all floor-to-ceiling glass, and a view of Lake Michigan that made the whole skyline look like it was drowning in gold light. Reyes and Voss had just been shortlisted, against three much bigger firms, to design Callaway's new flagship project, the Meridian Tower, and my business partner insisted we needed to be seen, which is how I ended up in a black mask with silver detailing, sweating through a rented tux, at a masquerade party thrown by the one company on the planet I had spent 6 years successfully avoiding. "Just don't get near the Callaway table," my best friend Jordan Kim said, adjusting my bow tie with the deep focus of a surgeon. Jordan is a beta, 29, works project management at our firm, and has been my best friend since architecture school, where his primary contribution to my life has been narrating my disasters in real time like a sports commentator. "You get near the Callaway table, you start doing the face." "What face?" "The face where your jaw does that thing." He mimicked it, some kind of clenched grimace that I refuse to believe I actually made. The "I am composting rage internally" face. "I don't have a face, Caleb. You have several faces. All of them are about Nathaniel Callaway." I didn't have time to argue, because that was the exact moment the office pool started. It's a Reyes and Voss tradition. Every big event, somebody starts a betting pool on something ridiculous, and this time it was Priya, our 24-year-old intern with a talent for chaos, a phone permanently glued to her hand, and an unnerving ability to know things before they happen, who announced that whoever kissed a masked stranger before midnight would win the pool, currently sitting at $340. "Absolutely not," I said. 200 people. Everyone's in a mask." "Nobody will ever know it was you," Priya said, eyes gleaming. "Live a little, Reyes. I want it noted for the historical record that I said no, multiple times." What actually happened was this. At 11:52 p.m., slightly buzzed on the good Prosecco, having spent the last hour doing my best impression of a functional professional adult, I spotted a tall man in a black mask standing alone near the floor-to-ceiling windows, backlit by the skyline, radiating the kind of broad-shouldered, unbothered confidence that made my very drunk brain go, "There, that one, quick, before you think about it." I did not think about it. Thinking about things has never really been my strong suit after 11 p.m. I crossed the room, rose up on my toes, and kissed a stranger in a black mask at a party thrown by the company I was trying to land as a client. Except the second his mouth met mine, something happened that should have stopped me instantly, and instead somehow made my brain short-circuit completely. He made a low, startled sound against my lips, one hand coming up automatically to my waist like reflex outran thought, and I knew that hand. I'd seen it cross out my drawings in red ink 100 times. I pulled back to find Nathaniel Callaway staring down at me through his mask, mouth parted, chest rising and falling like he'd forgotten how lungs worked. The room around us went quiet in that specific horrible way, not the polite hush of a toast, but the collective held breath of 200 people realizing in real time that something deeply interesting had just happened. Someone's champagne flute hit the floor. Somewhere behind me, I heard the unmistakable click of Priya's phone camera. "Reyes," Nate said, "just my last name." His voice had gone rough, low, completely unlike the smooth boardroom baritone I'd grown to loathe. That was, "I thought you were." I had no end to that sentence. There was no end to that sentence that didn't sound insane. He reached up and pulled his mask off slowly, and underneath it his expression wasn't the fury I braced for. It was something far more dangerous. Pure, unguarded shock, the kind that strips a person down to somebody younger and less certain than the one they usually let the world see. Then, because Nathaniel Callaway apparently could not go 5 consecutive seconds without being infuriating, his face slammed shut again, and he stepped back like I'd burned him. "Excuse me," he said, flat, and walked away so fast his tux jacket flared behind him like a cape in a superhero movie where the hero is actually the villain. The party exploded back into noise around me. Gasps, laughter, someone yelling, "Oh my God, is that on video?" And I just stood there at the window, heart slamming, mouth still tingling, staring out at a skyline that had absolutely no advice for me. By the time I got home, Priya's video had a name. Someone on the internal Slack had christened it Masked Ball Mayhem, and 41 people from a company I did not work for had somehow found my Instagram. I lay in bed, staring at my ceiling fan, going around and around, doing that thing where you replay a single moment so many times it stops meaning anything, and starts sounding like a word you've said too many times in a row. I didn't sleep. I lay there replaying it. Not the humiliation, weirdly, but the sound he'd made, low and surprised, right before his hand found my waist like it already knew the way. At 1:14 a.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. This is Nate Calloway. I got your number from the shortlist paperwork. We need to talk. There's a private terrace 1 floor above the party, still open. 15 minutes if you're willing. I want to be very clear. No reasonable, well-adjusted person gets a 2 a.m. text from the man who made their internship a war zone and thinks, sure, let's go stand on a rooftop with him. And yet I put on shoes. The terrace was empty except for him, Tygon. Top buttons undone, city lights scattered gold and white across the glass below us like something spilled. He didn't turn around when I arrived, just stood at the railing with his hands braced against it, shoulders up near his ears in a way I'd never once seen on the untouchable Nathaniel Calloway. You came, he said, still not looking at me. You said 15 minutes. I'm efficient when it matters. Everywhere else, ask my business partner how many deadlines I've missed. That almost got a laugh out of him. I heard the ghost of it, a single exhale through his nose. Then he turned, and in the terrace lights his eyes weren't cold at all. They were tired. Bone deep, quietly desperate tired, the kind you don't fake for an audience because there wasn't one. I need to know, he said, voice low, if that meant anything, or if I'm about to make the second worst mistake of my night by asking. My chest did something complicated. What was the first? Letting you walk away before I kissed you back properly. He dragged a hand through his hair, and for one unguarded second, Nathaniel Calloway, golden boy, boardroom shark, my personal 6-year grudge, looked almost young, uncertain, human. I've spent 6 years telling myself I couldn't stand you, Reyes. Tonight kind of blew a hole in that theory. I didn't have an answer that made sense, so I told him the only truth I had. I've spent 6 years telling myself the same thing about you. He studied me for a long moment, like he was trying to read fine print. And now? Now, I said, I have absolutely no idea what to do with any of this, which, for the record, is not a sentence I say often. I have opinions about everything: grout color, airport layouts, the correct ratio of oat milk to coffee. This is new territory. Yeah, he said, and this time the laugh actually made it out, low and a little rusty, like it hadn't been used in a while. Welcome to the club. Neither of us moved to leave. We just stood there, an accidental kiss and 6 years of history hanging in the space between us, and for the first time since I'd known him, I wasn't sure whether Nathaniel Calloway hated me, or something a great deal more complicated. The weekend between the gala and Monday was, professionally speaking, a disaster. By Saturday afternoon, masked ball mayhem had escaped the confines of internal company Slack and made its way onto an industry gossip account with 40,000 followers, captioned with devastating accuracy, Calloway Development's Golden Boy CEO caught in a very public lip lock with a mystery masked man at his own anniversary gala. Sources say it wasn't planned. My business partner called me 11 times. I answered 0 of them because I am, at heart, a coward who deals with crisis through avoidance and an unreasonable number of naps. Jordan naturally had no such restraint. He forwarded me screenshots of every single comment thread with color commentary attached, ranging from "this is objectively hilarious" to "okay, wait, people think you planned this. Are you a genius or an idiot?" to, memorably, someone in the replies made a fan account for you, too, Caleb, a fan account. I need you to understand the gravity of this. I did not plan this. I told him over the phone, lying flat on my kitchen floor, for reasons that made sense only to me in the moment. I lost a bet with my own impulse control. Sure, but the internet doesn't know that, and honestly, the internet likes you better this way. There's a poll. You're currently winning most unhinged corporate scandal of the year against an actual embezzlement case. That is not a competition I wanted to be in. Nobody ever wants to be in it, Caleb. That's what makes it good content. By Sunday evening, Calloway Development's PR department had issued an official non-statement so carefully worded it somehow managed to confirm nothing while also confirming everything. Mr. Calloway is a private individual, and the company will not be commenting further on his personal life at this time, which naturally only made the story bigger, because nothing fuels a rumor faster than a company paying a communications team good money to sound like it isn't panicking. I spent most of that weekend doing exactly what I do best under pressure, absolutely nothing productive. I reorganized my sock drawer. I watched 4 hours of a home renovation show specifically to yell at bad floor plans. I did not, under any circumstances, look at my phone every 11 minutes, hoping for a text from a man I'd sworn, for 6 straight years, that I hated. He didn't text again until Sunday night, and when he did, it was one line. Still thinking about the rooftop. Hope you are too. I was. Obviously I was. I just wasn't ready to admit it yet, so instead I sent back a photo of my newly alphabetized sock drawer with no caption, because apparently that's who I am under emotional duress, and got a single reply. This is either deeply concerning or deeply charming. I haven't decided. That made me laugh out loud, alone, on my kitchen floor, for entirely too long. Monday morning, my office phone rang before I'd even finished my coffee, which, for context, is usually the only thing that gets done before 10 a.m. in my world. It was a Callaway Developments assistant, a crisp, professional voice, informing me that Reyes and Voss had been selected, unanimously, apparently, to design the Meridian Tower, and that Mr. Callaway will be co-leading the project personally, given the sequel of the undertaking. He's what? I said, a little too loudly, causing Jordan to stick his head around the doorframe with the alertness of a man who lives for gossip and had clearly been lurking nearby for exactly this reason. Co-leading, the assistant repeated, unbothered. Your kickoff meeting is Thursday at 9. Please don't be late. Mr. Callaway values punctuality. I hung up and put my head down on my desk, which is also, incidentally, where I do some of my best thinking, mostly because it's closest to being a nap. So, Jordan said, strolling in and perching on my desk like he owned it, we won the biggest bid of the firm's history. The internet thinks you're either brave or unhinged, and you're going to be spending the next several months in a room with the man you kissed at a party while thinking he was a total stranger. When you say it like that, it sounds insane. It is insane, Caleb. This is how romance novels start. This is also how horror movies start. Very fine line. It's a professional project, I said, mostly to convince myself. We're both adults. We'll be normal about it. Jordan raised an eyebrow at me with the specific, devastating skepticism only a best friend of 9 years can achieve. Sure, he said, and the kiss meant nothing, and the 2 a.m. rooftop conversation was just business networking. How do you already know about the rooftop? Priya has a source in their building. Priya has a source everywhere, Caleb. She's basically the CIA with a nose ring. Anyway, he clapped his hands together, delighted. $340 is a lot of money, and I have a personal bet riding on how long it takes you two to combust. Try to make it interesting. And for the love of God, wear a real shirt to the kickoff. Not the one with the coffee stain you keep pretending is a design choice. I threw a stress ball at his head. He caught it, laughing, and left me alone with the horrifying realization that I was about to spend months, several days a week, in close professional proximity to Nathaniel Callaway. Alpha, CEO, my oldest grudge, and, apparently, an extremely good kisser. I spent the rest of that morning doing what I do best when faced with an overwhelming professional and emotional crisis. Absolutely nothing useful. I reorganized my desk. I answered 0 emails. I stared at the ceiling for a solid 10 minutes, contemplating whether it was too late to fake my own disappearance and open a small, quiet bakery somewhere without cell service. You're spiraling, Jordan announced, reappearing in my doorway with the uncanny timing of a man who monitors my emotional state via some kind of internal alert system. I am not spiraling. I am strategically resting. You've refolded that same piece of paper into a smaller square for the last 6 minutes. I looked down. He was infuriatingly correct. I set the paper down with as much dignity as I could muster. Fine. I'm mildly spiraling. In my defense, the man who used to make me cry in a supply closet just became my co-project lead less than 4 days after I accidentally kissed him at a party. Most people would call that Tuesday, Jordan said generously. You'll be fine. You're annoyingly resilient for someone who takes 3 unscheduled naps a day. They're not unscheduled. They're spontaneous. There's a difference. There is genuinely not, Jordan said, and left me to go warn Priya, loudly, through the open office, that betting pool payouts were suspended until further notice pending developments, which I chose, wisely, not to ask about. Thursday's kickoff meeting was held not in a conference room, as any sane person would expect, but in the Callaway Developments penthouse office, all raw concrete and black steel, and a wraparound view of the river that made my modest studio apartment feel like a shoebox with delusions of grandeur. Nate was already there when I arrived, standing at the window with his back to the door, and for one unfair second I let myself notice the line of his shoulders in a charcoal suit, the way the morning light caught the edge of his jaw, before I forcibly redirected my brain toward professionalism, mostly by reminding it that this man had once made me cry in a supply closet over a rendering he called technically competent, which is the worst thing I can say about anything. "Reyes," he said, turning. His voice had snapped back into its boardroom register, smooth and controlled, but his eyes did something complicated when they landed on me, something that flickered before he shut it down. "Good, let's start." For the first 20 minutes it was almost bearable. We reviewed the site plans, argued, pleasantly, even, about the tower's east-facing curtain wall, and I nearly forgot that 4 days earlier I had accidentally kissed this man in front of 200 witnesses. Then, out of absolutely nowhere, in the middle of a sentence about load-bearing columns, he stopped. "Why'd you correct me?" he asked. 6 years ago, the atrium calculations." I blinked. "You still remember that?" "I remember everything you've ever said to me, Reyes. That's kind of the problem." His jaw tightened like the admission cost him something. "I was 25 and terrified of failing in front of my father's board, and you, an intern, 23 years old, stood up in that room and proved me wrong without even blinking. I didn't know what to do with that. So I did the stupid thing instead. You made my life hell for a summer because I was right?" "I made your life hell," he said quietly, "because you were the first person who ever looked at me like I was just a guy who could be wrong, instead of the heir who wasn't allowed to be, and I didn't know how to want your attention without also wanting to make you pay for having it." The room went very still. Outside the window, the river kept moving like nothing had happened, like the man across from me hadn't just handed me 6 years of context I never expected to get. I started, and didn't finish, because I genuinely had no framework for processing Nathaniel Calloway being honest. He seemed to realize the same thing at the same moment, because his whole posture snapped back into corporate armor so fast it was almost violent. "Anyway," he said, voice clipped, gathering the site plans like they'd personally wronged him. "The east elevation. You were saying, I let him have the retreat. But something had shifted in that room, quiet and permanent, like a support beam sliding into place before anyone notices the whole structure's changed." Over the next 2 weeks, our working sessions fell into an uneasy rhythm. We met 3 times a week, alternating between Reyes and Voss and the Calloway offices, and slowly, infuriatingly, deliciously slowly, Nate started letting his guard down in small, unannounced increments. He made fun of my coffee order, a triple shot with an unreasonable amount of oat milk. I made fun of the fact that his idea of Casual Friday was swapping one $2,000 suit for a marginally softer one. He caught me, twice, taking what I insisted were closed-eye conceptual thinking breaks at my drafting table, and were absolutely, unambiguously naps, and instead of mocking me the way I expected, he just quietly turned the office thermostat down 2 degrees so I wouldn't wake up sweating, which was somehow more devastating than any insult he'd ever thrown at me. He started leaving voice memos on my phone at odd hours, half-formed design ideas, once an entire rant about a competitor's terrible cantilever, like he'd simply forgotten we weren't supposed to be doing this. One afternoon, a reporter from a local business journal showed up unannounced to photograph the Meridian site for a feature on the project, and caught us mid-argument over a support column, standing close enough that Nate had one hand braced on the drafting table on either side of me, both of us leaning in like we were about to either kiss or start a structural engineering fistfight. The photo ran 2 days later with the caption "Calloway Developments and Reyes and Voss," a promising new creative partnership which made Jordan laugh so hard at his desk that he had to leave the room, and made Nate's assistant quietly ask if she should manage expectations with the press office, to which Nate replied, with the kind of composed corporate calm that fooled absolutely nobody in that room, "No, let it run." "You wanted that photo out there," I accused him later, holding up the printed clipping like evidence. "I have no idea what you're talking about," he said, entirely unconvincingly, already reaching for his coffee to hide the smile creeping across his face. "You are a terrible liar for a man who runs board meetings for a living." "I'm an excellent liar," he corrected. "I simply choose not to lie to you. There's a difference. That's the same thing you said about being lazy versus efficient." "I stand by both distinctions," he said, and stole my coffee out of my hand entirely, taking a long sip while maintaining unbroken, deeply smug eye contact, and I decided, right then, that I was probably beyond saving. It was during the third week, working late in the Callaway penthouse with the city gone dark and gold outside the windows, that he told me about Weston. "My father wants me to formalize a match," he said, not looking up from the blueprints. His voice had gone carefully flat, the way people talk when they're pretending a thing doesn't matter. Weston Hale. Alpha, 30 years old, runs his family's investment firm, checks every box on my father's very long list. There's a dinner in 10 days. Sort of an unofficial engagement preview. Something cold dropped through my stomach. "Oh," I said, aiming for casual and landing somewhere closer to strangled. "It's not." He stopped, exhaled hard through his nose, set down his pen. "It's not what I want. It's what's expected. There's a difference, and my father has never once cared about it." "What do you want?" I asked, quieter than I meant to. He looked at me then, really looked, in a way that made the room feel smaller than the wide-open floor plan had any right to. "I think you already know the answer to that, Reyes. I just don't know if I'm brave enough to say it out loud yet." "That's fair," I said. "For what it's worth, I've never once been described as brave. I once negotiated an entire contract renewal over text message because I didn't want to have the phone call. Bravery isn't really my department either." That got a real laugh out of him, short and surprised, like it had escaped before he could stop it. "Somehow I don't believe that. You corrected my math in front of my own project team when you were 23 and hadn't even graduated yet. That was different. That was about a decimal point. This is about your entire life plan, your father, and a guy named Weston who sounds like he irons his jeans." "He absolutely irons his jeans," Nate said. And for a second, the tension in his shoulders eased, like the joke had given him somewhere to put the fear down. Then it came right back. "My father's had this planned since I was 22. Hale Capital merges nicely with our portfolio. Weston's easy, low maintenance, exactly what a Callaway heir is supposed to want. On paper, it's a smart match. And off paper? Off paper, I spent the last 3 weeks thinking about a guy who takes naps at his drafting table and argues with me about oat milk ratios like it's a matter of national security." His voice had dropped, rougher now. "Off paper, none of this makes any sense, and I don't know what to do with that." I didn't push. I just reached over and rested my hand near his on the drafting table. Not quite touching, just close enough that he could close the distance if he wanted to. He did. His fingers laced through mine, careful, like he expected me to pull away, and for a long moment neither of us said anything at all. Outside, the city hummed on, oblivious, while inside that glass tower, something between us that had been simmering for 6 years finally, quietly, caught fire. "For the record," I said eventually, "I'm not going anywhere just because your father has a spreadsheet with my competition's name on it. You're very calm about this." "I'm terrified," I admitted. "I'm just better at hiding it than you are. 6 years of watching you do it taught me the technique." He huffed something that was almost a laugh, almost a groan, and rested his forehead briefly against our joined hands like he needed a second to just breathe. Neither of us said anything else that night. We didn't need to. 2 nights later, he showed up at my apartment unannounced, still in his work clothes, tie loosened, looking like a man who'd left the office mid-thought and simply kept walking until he ended up at my door. "This is a surprise," I said, blocking the doorway with my body the way you do when your apartment currently looks like a crime scene involving takeout containers and unfolded laundry. "I wanted to see you somewhere that wasn't a construction site or a boardroom." His eyes moved past me into the apartment, taking in the chaos with something that looked suspiciously like fondness, rather than horror. "Is that a blanket fort?" "It's a reading nook. I was reading, under a blanket." "In a fort-adjacent configuration, you were napping." I was resting my eyes while conceptually engaging with a design magazine. He laughed, that low, real laugh I was becoming dangerously fond of, and let himself in without waiting for an invitation, stepping over a pile of laundry with the easy confidence of a man who had clearly decided my apartment's chaos wasn't a deal-breaker. He ended up folded onto my couch within 10 minutes, sleeves rolled up, helping me half-heartedly refold the laundry he'd stepped over, which was somehow the most surreal image of my entire year. Nathaniel Callaway, CEO, folding my mismatched socks like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You could hire someone for this," he pointed out, holding up a sock with a hole in it like evidence in a trial. "I could. I choose not to. There's a difference between lazy and efficient, and I like to think I operate somewhere in the overlap. That's not a real distinction. It's my distinction. I invented it. I'm very proud of it. We ordered dinner we were both too tired to cook, a fact that would become extremely relevant 6 months later, given what happened to those eggs, and ate it on the floor because I refuse, on principle, to own a coffee table sturdy enough for actual meals. He told me, quietly, over cheap noodles and a documentary neither of us was really watching, about the first building his father ever let him design alone, and how he'd cried in the parking garage the day it opened because it was the first thing in his life that felt like it was actually his. I told him about the summer I almost dropped out of architecture school, and how correcting his math in that room full of senior partners had been less about proving him wrong and more about proving to myself that I belonged there at all. We've had a very strange 6 years, he said eventually, head tipped back against my couch cushions, eyes half closed. Understatement of the century. I don't regret any of it. Even the bad parts. Especially the bad parts, actually, because they got us here. He reached over and laced our fingers together again, the same careful, deliberate way he had at the drafting table, like it was still new enough to be worth being gentle with. Is that insane? A little, I admitted. I'm okay with a little insane. He fell asleep on my couch that night, tie fully off by then, one arm thrown over his eyes, looking younger and softer than I'd ever seen the golden boy of Callaway Developments look in 6 years of knowing him. I didn't wake him. I just sat there for a while, watching him breathe, and thought, with a kind of quiet, terrified clarity, that I was in enormous trouble. The weeks that followed were, against every reasonable expectation I'd ever held about Nathaniel Callaway, genuinely sweet. He started showing up to our work sessions with my coffee order already in hand, correct down to the unreasonable oat milk ratio. I caught him smiling, a real one, not the boardroom version, at something I'd said, and he looked so startled by his own face that I couldn't stop laughing for a solid 5 minutes while he threatened, with zero real menace, to fire my whole firm and replace us with, in his exact words, literally anyone less annoying. You'd be bored within a week, I told him. I'd be bored within a day, he admitted, which was somehow the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to me, a fact that concerned me deeply about my own priorities. We kissed for the second time on a Tuesday, in the half-finished Meridian Tower site office, surrounded by rolled blueprints and the smell of fresh concrete, and it was nothing like the chaos of the masquerade. It was slow, deliberate, the kind of kiss that felt like a decision instead of an accident, his hand cupping my jaw like I was something worth being careful with. I've been thinking about doing that since the rooftop, he admitted against my mouth, and I felt the words more than heard them. You had 6 years to think about it before that, I pointed out. I was an idiot for 6 years. Give me a break. I'm a fast learner now. He kissed me again, softer, and somewhere in my chest, a wall I'd built at 23 years old finally, quietly, came down. Jordan noticed the change immediately. Of course he did. Jordan notices everything. It's genuinely his one professional superpower besides scheduling, and made it his personal mission to comment on it constantly. You're doing the thing, he said one morning, watching me hum while reviewing structural drawings, an activity I usually approach with the enthusiasm of someone doing their taxes. What thing? The thing where you're annoyingly happy and also, somehow, more productive, which honestly is the more alarming part. You've replied to 3 emails today. Unprompted, who are you? He paused, studying me with real, if slightly smug, affection. I'm happy for you, though. Genuinely. Even if it means I've lost the office pool bet on how long it'd take before you two set the building on fire. We haven't set anything on fire. Yet, Jordan said darkly, and went back to his spreadsheet. For a while, it really did feel like we could just be 2 people falling for each other, undisturbed by the 6 years of history, or the fact that one of us ran a multi-billion-dollar company with a father who had extremely specific opinions about legacy. We had lunches on the Meridian site's half-built rooftop, watching the skyline like we owned it, me perpetually 5 minutes late because I'd hit snooze on my alarm one too many times, and he'd perpetually pretend to be annoyed about it while saving me a seat anyway. We texted stupid architecture memes back and forth at 2 a.m. He learned that I hummed when I was stressed and started humming back at me across conference tables just to make me laugh mid-presentation, which got me a very stern look from my own business partner and 0 regrets from me. It felt, for those few weeks, like something soft and real and entirely ours. My apartment slowly accumulated small, unremarkable evidence of him. A phone charger left on my nightstand, a spare charcoal blazer hung in my closet, just in case, a specific brand of tea he liked, that I started keeping stocked without ever quite admitting why. Jordan noticed the tea first, naturally, and held it up at the office one morning like a detective presenting Exhibit A. "This," he announced, "is not your tea. You don't drink tea. You've told me, extensively, that tea is sad coffee. It's for a client. Which client drinks oolong?" I did not have an answer for that, and Jordan's grin told me he already knew it. The first time Nate came by the Reyes and Voss office for something that wasn't strictly project-related, Jordan nearly dropped an entire tray of coffee. "So this is the guy," Jordan said, recovering admirably fast, sticking out a hand like he hadn't just watched 2 years of increasingly unhinged theories about my love life collapse into one very tall, very well-dressed data point. "Jordan Kim, I run this place's actual logistics while Caleb naps through half of them." "I do not nap through half of them," I said. "You napped through the entire Hutchins presentation. That was a closed-eye conceptual thinking break." "Sure," Jordan said deadpan, then turned back to Nate with the sudden warmth of a man who has decided, on the spot, that he approves. "Anyway, treat him well, or I will personally leak the blueprints for something extremely embarrassing you've built." "Understood," Nate said, and to my genuine shock, he didn't look remotely rattled by the threat. He looked entertained, the corner of his mouth twitching in a way I was starting to recognize as his real smile trying to sneak out. "For what it's worth, Kim, I've got 6 years of embarrassing material on him, too. We could trade." "Oh, I like him," Jordan announced to the room at large, as if I hadn't been standing right there. Priya materialized out of nowhere with the timing of someone who'd clearly been listening from the supply closet the entire time, phone already up. "Can I get a picture for the group chat? Nobody's going to believe me otherwise." "Absolutely not," I said. "One picture," Nate said, and pulled me in against his side before I could protest, chin resting easily on top of my head like we'd been doing this for years instead of weeks. Priya squealed audibly and fled back toward her desk to presumably ruin my life via group text. "You're enjoying this," I accused him. "I spent 6 years being terrified of what it would feel like to want you and have people know about it," he said. Quiet enough that it was just for me. "Turns out it feels like this. I could get used to it." 2 days later, he took me on our first real date. Not a work dinner, not a rooftop confession under duress, an actual deliberate date, at a hole-in-the-wall taco place 2 blocks from my apartment that I was fairly sure Callaway Developments could have bought and demolished without noticing the expense. "This is not where I expected the CEO of a real estate empire to take someone," I said, watching him fold himself into a plastic chair, clearly not designed for a man his size. "I looked up your Yelp reviews," he admitted, mildly sheepish in a way that did unfair things to my chest. "You'd left 4 different 5-star reviews for this place over the years. Figured that told me more about you than any restaurant I could have picked myself. You stalked my Yelp history." "I did extensive due diligence," he corrected, entirely unbothered, and ordered us both way too much food, and let me steal from his plate without complaint, and laughed. Really laughed, loud enough that the guy behind the counter looked over. When I explained, in far too much detail, my theory that 90% of bad kitchen renovations could be traced back to someone falling in love with an open floor plan they didn't actually need. By the time he walked me the 2 blocks home, hands in his pockets, matching his pace to mine, without seeming to notice he was doing it, I understood something I hadn't let myself admit yet. This wasn't a fluke, or an accident, or 6 years of unresolved tension finally boiling over. This was just Nate, the real one, underneath the boardroom voice and the annual report jaw, and I liked him. Terrifyingly, uncomplicatedly, I liked him. "This is the part where I'm supposed to say goodnight and leave," he said at my door, not moving. "Is it? I'm finding I'm not great at that part." "Then don't," I said, and he didn't, and it was, without question, the best decision either of us made that entire month. Of course, because Nathaniel Callaway's life had never once been simple, it didn't stay that way. The unofficial engagement dinner with Weston Hale happened whether either of us wanted it to or not. Richard Callaway, Nate's father, 63, silver-haired, an alpha of the old money, old rules variety who'd built the company from a single downtown lot into a Midwest empire, did not believe in canceling plans for something as inconvenient as his son's feelings. I found out about it because Priya, predictably, saw the photo before I did. Nate at a downtown restaurant, seated across from a polished, handsome alpha I didn't recognize, his father beaming between them like a man closing a very satisfying deal. The alpha in the photo, I'd later learn, was Weston Hale, 30 years old, heir to Hale Capital, the kind of man who looked like he'd been assembled in a lab specifically to please boards of directors. Good posture, better tailoring, a smile so calibrated it barely counted as an expression at all. I told myself it was fine. Business dinner. Family obligation. Nothing to do with us. It stopped being fine when Nate canceled our Thursday session with a 2-word text, "Can't make it," and didn't answer when I called to ask why. He avoided me for 4 days. 4 days of clipped Slack messages about drywall specs and radio silence about everything else. 4 days of me lying awake, wondering if the rooftop, the site office, the humming across conference tables had all just been a very elaborate, very expensive way for Nathaniel Calloway to relearn how to break my heart. On the 5th day, I finally cornered him after a site walkthrough, both of us alone on the unfinished 30th floor, wind moving through the open steel frame around us like the building itself was holding its breath. "Are you going to tell me what's going on?" I said, "or are we just doing the silent treatment forever? Because I want you to know I have the emotional stamina of a golden retriever, and I will absolutely just keep showing up." That almost got a laugh out of him, but it died fast. My father's finalizing a formal courtship agreement with the Hale family. There's a press announcement in under 2 weeks. The floor seemed to tilt under me even though the concrete was perfectly level. "And you're just going along with it? I don't know what else to do, Caleb." His voice cracked on my name the first time he'd used it instead of Rhea's in weeks, and it undid something in me even as I tried to stay angry. Every trophy in my life has his fingerprints on it. Every decision. I told myself once I made partner, once I proved myself, I'd get to choose something for myself. And now I have the chance to choose you, and I'm still standing here too scared to take it. "Then don't take it," I said, throat tight. "Don't drag me through weeks of pretending to be your dirty secret while you figure out if you're brave enough to want something your father didn't pick for you. That's not." He reached for me, and I stepped back, and something in his face cracked open at the movement, raw and stricken. "Then what is it, Nate?" My voice came out rougher than I meant it to, the wind snatching at the edges of it, 30 floors of open steel and nothing between us but everything we hadn't said yet. Because from where I'm standing, it looks a lot like you letting your father write the ending to this before we even got a real chance at the middle. That's not fair. Maybe not. I'm not feeling particularly fair right now. I wrapped my arms around myself against the wind or against him. I genuinely couldn't tell which anymore. I watched you stand in that penthouse and tell me you wanted to choose something for yourself. I believed you. That's on me, I guess. Caleb, I deserve better than being someone's maybe, I said quietly. So do you, Nate. You just haven't figured that out yet. I walked off that unfinished floor and didn't look back, even though every step felt like tearing something out of my own chest. I also, in a move I'm not proud of, took the stairs down 30 flights, rather than risk being in an elevator with him, which is either evidence of deep emotional resolve or just further proof that I make terrible decisions under pressure. Possibly both. The next week was miserable in the specific quiet way. Heartbreak is miserable when you still have to see the person's name in your inbox 40 times a day, because apparently emotional devastation does not, in fact, pause a multi-million-dollar construction timeline. I threw myself into Meridian Tower's structural revisions, redlining drawings at midnight, avoiding anything that wasn't strictly, professionally necessary, and generally proving Jordan's earlier theory that I channel every emotion I refuse to feel directly into overworking. It was, ironically, the least lazy week of my entire adult life, which felt like a personal betrayal of everything I stood for. I ran into Weston Hale exactly once during that stretch, entirely by accident, both of us waiting at the same downtown coffee cart at 7 in the morning. He recognized me before I recognized him, which in hindsight should have told me something, since I had absolutely no idea what he looked like beyond a blurry phone photo. "You're the architect," he said, not unkindly, studying me over his coffee with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Caleb, right? That's me. And you're the—" I gestured vaguely, unsure how to finish that sentence in public. the inconvenience, he offered, with a faint, dry smile that didn't match the panic clawing up my throat. Relax. I'm not going to make a scene over a coffee cart. For what it's worth, Reyes, I don't particularly want this arrangement any more than you seem to. Before I could figure out what to do with that information, his car pulled up and he was gone, leaving me standing there with a lukewarm latte and a whole new set of things to not think about for the rest of the day. Jordan showed up to my apartment on day 4 with takeout and zero patience for my sulking. Okay, he said, dropping a bag of pad thai on my coffee table like a gavel. I've let you mope for 4 days. That's the legal limit under best friend law. Talk, so I did. All of it. The rooftop, the site office, the engagement dinner, the wind on the 30th floor, the deeply unsettling coffee cart encounter with a man who irons his jeans. Jordan listened without interrupting, which for Jordan is basically an act of heroic restraint, occasionally punctuated by him stealing spring rolls directly off my plate as a show of solidarity. Okay, he said when I finished. Dumb question. Do you actually think he doesn't want you? Or do you think he wants you and is just a coward about his dad? I opened my mouth to argue and found, annoyingly, that I couldn't. That's what I thought, Jordan said. Look, I'm not saying go crawling back. You did the right thing walking away from a maybe. But maybe give the guy a chance to stop being a maybe before you write the whole thing off. Cowardice is fixable, Caleb. Terrible personalities are not. You'd know, you dated one in grad school. That was one time. It was deeply memorable. I still have the group chat screenshots. I show them at parties sometimes. People applaud. I laughed despite myself, and something in my chest loosened for the first time in days. When did you become the wise one in this friendship? I've always been the wise one. You've just been too busy pretending to hate a man you were clearly in love with to notice. He stole one more spring roll and stood, brushing crumbs off his jeans. Get some sleep, Reyes. You've got a building to finish, whether your love life cooperates or not. The Callaway Developments press announcement for the Meridian Towers topping out ceremony, a huge industry event, half the city's business press expected, landed on the calendar exactly 9 days later. It was also, I learned via a company-wide email I definitely wasn't supposed to still be on, the same event where Richard Callaway intended to formally announce his son's courtship with Weston Hale. I almost didn't go. Jordan physically put me in an Uber. You built that tower, he said through the car window, shoving a garment bag with my one good suit into my arms. You're going to stand in front of it, whether your heart's in one piece or not. Might as well look good doing it. The ceremony was on the Meridian's finished top floor, glass walls still faintly smelling of sealant, the whole skyline spread out gold and glittering below like the night of the masquerade all over again. I found a spot near the back, close to the exit, fully intending to give a polite handshake and leave before the announcement. That plan lasted exactly as long as it took Richard Callaway to step up to the podium. Before we celebrate this extraordinary building, he began, in the booming, practiced voice of a man used to rooms bending around him, I have a personal announcement. My son, Nathaniel, has. Actually, Nate said, stepping up beside his father, taking the microphone with a hand that I could see, even from the back of the room, was faintly shaking. I'd like to make my own announcement, Dad, if that's all right. The room went quiet in that specific way I now recognized. The collective held breath of people realizing something deeply interesting was about to happen. I'm not marrying Weston Hale, Nate said, into a silence so total I could hear my own pulse. I've spent my entire life doing what this company, what this family name, expected of me, and I built a very impressive, very lonely life out of it. And then, 6 weeks ago, the man who once corrected my math in front of the whole studio walked back into my life and made me want something my father never put on my list. He found me at the back of the room. His eyes locked on mine across 200 stunned faces, and for one suspended second, it was just the two of us again, the way it had been on that rooftop. Caleb Reyes designed the building we're standing in, he said, voice steadying. He also, somewhat accidentally, kissed me at this company's anniversary gala 6 weeks ago, and it was the best mistake of my entire life. I love him. I should have said that a week ago on an unfinished floor of this exact building instead of letting him walk away scared. I'm saying it now, in front of everyone, because I'm done being too much of a coward to choose my own life. The room erupted, gasps, a stunned scattering of applause. Someone's champagne flute hitting the floor for the second time in this story. Priya somewhere near the front, definitely filming every second of it, already narrating under her breath. This is going to break the internal slack all over again. A reporter near the front row was typing so fast on her phone I half expected smoke to come off it. Somewhere to my left, an older board member muttered, "Well, that's certainly one way to open a ceremony," in a tone that suggested he'd seen stranger things at Calloway family events over the years and was, if anything, mildly entertained. Richard Calloway stood frozen at the podium, mouth working silently, looking exactly like a man watching a 20-year plan collapse in real time, one hand gripping the podium's edge like it was the only thing keeping him upright. I don't remember crossing the room. I remember Nate's hand finding my face, his thumb brushing my cheek button, his forehead dropping to rest against mine, while 200 people Wald's entire carefully constructed life reroute itself in front of their eyes. "You're insane," I whispered. "You just did that in front of your father's entire board." "Yeah," he said, and he was smiling, really smiling, the rare, unguarded one I'd only ever seen in private. "Turns out I'm braver than I thought, as long as you're the thing I'm being brave for." I kissed him then, on purpose this time, in front of everyone, and the room's shocked silence dissolved into applause, loud enough to rattle the glass. Somewhere near the front, I heard Jordan's voice cut clean through the noise. $340, let's go. Even Richard Calloway, eventually, relaxed his stance enough to shake my hand, grudgingly, stiffly, the way old money does everything, but a start all the same. Weston Hale, for his part, looked less devastated than politely relieved. He pulled me aside near the bar an hour later to confess, quietly amused, that he'd been dreading the courtship dinner as much as Nate had, mostly because he'd been quietly seeing someone his own family would never approve of either. "Small world," he said, clinking his glass against mine. "Congratulations, by the way. He talked about you for 20 straight minutes at that dinner your friend's spy apparently reported back on. I should have charged you for the therapy session." "For what it's worth," I said, "I'm sorry you got dragged into all this. Family expectations dressed up as romance is a genuinely rough way to spend an evening. Don't be. Honestly, this might be the most useful dinner of my year. Gave me the exact excuse I needed to stop pretending I was open to it." He glanced across the room, to where his own quietly disapproved of someone was presumably waiting, and something private and hopeful crossed his face before he shut it down, professional as ever. "Besides, watching your husband hijack his own father's podium was, genuinely, the best thing I've seen at a corporate event in a decade. I'm almost disappointed I won't get a repeat performance at my own dinner." "Don't tempt me," I said. "I make questionable decisions at parties. It's kind of my whole thing." "So I've heard," Weston said, with a dry, knowing smile, and left me there by the bar to go find his own quietly rebellious happy ending. Later, after the crowd had thinned, and the catering staff had started quietly dismantling the podium, Nate found me by the same floor-to-ceiling windows where I'd stood, alone, right after the accidental kiss that started all of it. He came up behind me, arms sliding around my waist, chin settling against my shoulder like it belonged there. "Your dad's going to need therapy," I said, watching Richard Calloway across the room, still visibly recalibrating his entire worldview while an aide tried to hand him a drink. "My dad's going to need several therapists," Nate agreed. "But he'll come around. He always does, eventually, usually after a suspiciously long silence and an unprompted golf trip. I've learned to read the signs. And if he doesn't?" He turned me around gently, hands framing my face like I was something worth being careful with, the way he'd done in the site office weeks ago. "Then I'll survive it. I already decided that on the rooftop, the first night, I just needed a few more weeks to catch up to my own decision." He pressed his forehead to mine. "Thank you for waiting for me to get there." "I wasn't waiting," I said. "I was redlining blueprints at midnight and pretending I wasn't in love with you. Very different activity." "Same result," he murmured, and kissed me again, slow and unhurried, with absolutely no audience left to perform for, which somehow made it better than the one in front of 200 people. We got married the following spring, on the Meridian Tower's rooftop terrace, under the same skyline that had watched the whole ridiculous story unfold. The accidental kiss, the 2 a.m. rooftop confession, the topping out ceremony that turned into a proposal nobody saw coming. Richard Calloway walked his son down the aisle looking faintly bewildered by his own happiness, which is frankly the most character growth I ever expected out of the man. He shook my hand before the ceremony started, gripping it a beat too long, and said gruffly, "You made him better than any merger ever could have," which is possibly the single kindest sentence that man has ever produced in his 63 years on this earth, and he looked almost as stunned by it as I was. Weston Hale came and brought his museum curator boyfriend, a soft-spoken man named Miles, who spent the entire reception quietly identifying the provenance of the venue's light fixtures, which delighted me more than I expected. Priya cried through the entire ceremony and then, less than an hour later, was seen aggressively negotiating a discount on the leftover flower arrangements for her own apartment, which felt like an entirely appropriate send-off. Jordan gave a best man speech that somehow worked the words "office betting pool" into a genuinely touching toast about watching me fall for the one person I swore I'd never forgive, and ended it by publicly announcing, to a room full of Callaway board members in expensive suits, that he had personally won $340 off this relationship and considered it the best investment of his career. Richard Callaway laughed so hard he had to sit down, which nobody, least of all Richard Callaway, saw coming. Nate's vows were short and unpolished in a way that felt more like him than any boardroom speech ever had. "I spent 6 years building a version of myself I thought you'd never forgive," he said, hands shaking slightly around the small card he'd clearly written and rewritten a dozen times. "And then you kissed the wrong stranger at the wrong party, and somehow that was the first honest thing to happen to either of us in years. I don't have anything clever to compare that to. I just know I don't want to build anything else without you standing next to me while I do it." Mine were significantly less polished, mostly because I'd procrastinated writing them until the morning of, a fact Jordan will never let me live down. I told Nate that I'd spent 6 years hating a man who turned out to be the loneliest person I'd ever met, and that somewhere between an atrium calculation and an accidental kiss, hating him had quietly, embarrassingly, turned into something else entirely. I told him that I still thought he was insufferable, occasionally, and that I planned to keep telling him so for the rest of lives, and that this was, as far as I was concerned, the most romantic thing I had ever said to anyone. I fell asleep during the reception's second slow song, standing up, mid-sway, forehead against his shoulder, which Nate has never once let me forget and brings up, unprompted, at least once a month. If you'd told 23-year-old me, standing in that studio, getting his drawings redlined into oblivion by an insufferable golden boy alpha, that I'd end up married to the guy, I would have laughed you out of the building. But here we are. "You burned the eggs again," Nate said, deeply unimpressed, standing in the doorway of our kitchen in a t-shirt so old and soft it had clearly survived several administrations of his life before me. "I did not burn them. I caramelized them. Caleb. They're black. That's not a flavor profile. That's a structural failure," says the man who once told his entire board of directors he was in love with me instead of finishing his own sentence about a merger. "That," he said, crossing the kitchen to wrap his arms around me from behind, chin dropping to my shoulder, "was the single best business decision I've ever made, and you know it." I leaned back into him, breathing in coffee and cedar and something warm and entirely his, the eggs forgotten on the stove behind us. 6 months into marriage, and Nathaniel Callaway, CEO, golden boy, my oldest and most inconvenient grudge, still made my pulse do something ridiculous every single morning, like my body hadn't gotten the memo that the chase was over. "Weston's asking if we're coming to his engagement party," he murmured against my neck. Apparently his mystery boyfriend turned out to be a museum curator his family also disapproves of. There's a theme developing among us alphas who married out of the approved list. Tell him we'll be there. Assuming you don't try to propose to me again in front of 200 witnesses. Once was memorable, twice is just showing off. No promises, he repeated, and this time I actually believed he meant it as a threat. The smoke alarm finally quieted down, and he reached past me to shut off the stove entirely, resigning the eggs to their fate, then steered me by the shoulders toward the kitchen table instead, where a box from the bakery down the street was already sitting, suspiciously perfectly timed. "You didn't," I said. "I ordered it last night." "I know exactly how good you are at breakfast, Caleb. I've been married to you for 6 months. I've done the research." He set 2 plates down, entirely too pleased with himself, and dropped into the chair across from me. Also, Jordan called. He wants to know if we're free Friday. Apparently there's a new betting pool circulating at your office about how long it'll take us to finish renovating the guest bathroom. Absolutely not. I refuse to be a line item in Jordan's spreadsheet again. Too late. Priya already started a group chat poll. I believe you're currently favored to finish it in under a month, which, given your track record with home projects, feels wildly optimistic. I resent that. You should. It's accurate. Although, for the record, I happen to like your version of lazy. It's grown on me considerably over the past 6 years, mostly against my will. High praise from a man who irons his own gym shorts. I contain multitudes, he said, entirely serious, and I nearly choked on my coffee laughing. He reached across the table and stole a piece of bakery pastry directly off my plate, the same easy, unbothered confidence he'd had, folding my mismatched socks on our second real date, and I found myself grinning at him over breakfast like an idiot, the way I had every single morning since the wedding, the way I suspected I probably would for the rest of my life. No promises, he said, laughing against my skin, and it was such a light, easy sound, nothing at all like the tightly controlled boardroom voice that used to make my whole body brace for impact, that I twisted around just to see his face, to watch him be unguarded and happy and entirely, ridiculously mine. Hey, I said, for the record, worst decision of my life, that kiss at your dumb gala. Best mistake of mine, he said, and kissed me, slow and certain, the smoke alarm going off behind us over the ruined eggs, both of us laughing into it instead of pulling apart. Because that's the thing nobody tells you about falling for your worst enemy. Sometimes the messiest beginnings build the sturdiest things. And 6 years, one masquerade, one very public confession, and one ring later, I finally understood exactly what Nathaniel Calloway meant, that first night on the rooftop, when he said some mistakes are worth making twice. Turns out the golden boy of Calloway Developments and the guy who once corrected his math make a pretty good team, on paper and off it. If you made it all the way here, thank you genuinely. If you liked watching two idiots almost ruin a very expensive building deal over feelings neither of them wanted to admit to, drop a comment, hit like, and follow along for the next one. There's always another disaster brewing somewhere in this city, and I'll be right here to tell you about it.